This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review with Gilad Halpern.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review, a program dedicated to the word, to the thought and to debate, brought to you by the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute, which promotes humanistic, democratic and liberal values in the social discourse in Israel. I'm your host Gilad Halpern, and every week I'll be engaging in close encounters of the intellectual kind, with writers and scholars, or simply people of ideas, of all types and vocations, who have done something to make our lives a tad more interesting. My guest today is the head of the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, who co-chaired an international conference that was held at the Van Leer Institute earlier this month and was entitled Internationalization, Globalization and Governance of Academia. Professor Gilad Rory, hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Hi, hello Gilad.
So let's start with the title and unpack it. Internationalization and globalization. What's the difference, really?
Globalization is the global process we all acknowledge where things diffuse from here to there, where we come in close contact and exchange with people from across the world, firms travel around the world, etc. Internationalization is a more recent strategy that certain companies and universities have in order to reach out into the world. So the field of academia has been global from its inception. Scientists have been traveling around Europe from one university to another to study with the masters they wanted to learn from. However, these days, universities practice internationalization, strategically targeting populations of students, of faculty, and even gathering their resources for research and other activities from around the world.
Why did it take so long then? I mean, if the global nature of universities was there from the outset, why did it take so long until universities started adapting themselves to this situation?
Universities are more and more strategic about the way they go about the practice that they've had for 1,000 years. The first university was founded in Bologna in the 11th century, so this is an institution that is about to celebrate a millennium of activity. But recently, universities engage in globalization in a more strategic way, and with that, planning, building policies and building practices that formalize what was until now just a scientific practice that conformed to the academic ethos.
Mm-hmm. Is money the elephant in the room? Because globalization quite often is code for capitalism, for global capitalism, the free flow of capital across borders. Is this really the reason why universities have started doing it? Is it some sort of, have they succumbed to capitalism?
Yes and no. Because they have succumbed to capitalism like many other organizations around the world, not merely for the sake of money, but also because of cultural pressures, because of the normative environment in which universities are embedded. So indeed, one of the ways universities explain why they're going abroad is in order for them to bring research money, to bring excellent faculty. The excellent faculty lure excellent students. If they come from abroad, they may come with private tuition and things like that. However, what makes us think of ourselves as part of the world is the fact that we think of ourselves as modern, and that the normative definition of organizations being modern is the fact that they engage with the world, that they engage with world society.
Is that what you mean by the normative environment in which universities operate?
Indeed. So one of the normative addicts of our current era is that we are part of world society. Others are more, I think, aligned with what you called capitalism, because part of the normative addicts for a modern organization these days is the way they think about how they engage with the world. And we right now I mean academia, explain our existence and our embeddedness in the world in terms that we have borrowed from economic thinking. We think in terms of competition over resources. We think about our relative advantage. We quantify our position in the world in terms of ranking. We can monitorize many of our activities. And in this sense, we are not only embedded in world society, but in the 21st century, capitalist neoliberal world society.
Are students treated as customers? Does academia need that they have to give them some good value for their money?
We more and more think in that direction, and in that sense, we more and more think of universities as a service organization. We are concerned about the student services we provide. We are concerned with our image in academia and in society in general, etc.
Is that a threat to scholarship? Because scholarship, at the end of the day, cannot always, or in many cases, cannot be translated into, this vocabulary of the market?
I think academia is a very resilient institution, and over the 1,000 years of universities practicing, we have changed in tune with social changes. So going back to your word threat, I don't think we're going to cease to exist in this battle with changing social norms. But I do think that at the moment there is tension between the traditionalist ethos of science, that science is done for the sake of science, that knowledge is acquired for the sake of knowledge, and between the managerialist culture that penetrates academia and is pressuring universities to think of themselves, as I mentioned, service organizations, as knowledge producers, not only knowledge diffusers, etc.
So do you think that this notion of producing knowledge for the sake of knowledge and science for the sake of science is really obsolete and doesn't really fit into the modern world? Are we seeing its last chapters? Is it about to vanish?
Oh no, definitely not, Gilad. Knowledge is indeed a basis for social change. Social change of many sorts. Some change comes from chemical advancement that produce paints or drugs, from engineering knowledge that produces the machinery, the digital era, etc. And also the humanities and social sciences bring a lot of change by calling attention to new phenomena, by giving name and a category to practices or trends we otherwise overlook or think of them as mundane. In that respect, academia always brings changes. Not all of these change must be commercialized and sold for itself. And therefore, they will always, and I hope always will continue to be, these two paths of producing knowledge. Knowledge that is applicable to specific practices, and knowledge that at the moment we don't see its practicality, but will surely impact and bring some change.
So this tension between the market forces and scholarship has heightened over the past few decades. How many years are we talking about, really? Is it really the turn of the century that these processes have started?
Which century? Because we're talking about 1,000 years here. Yeah. We think of the entrepreneurial university, we mark the era of the entrepreneurial university after World War II, so 1945.
Right.
But universities did not create offices for technology transfer, meaning units in academic institutions that are dedicated to the commercialization of knowledge until the 1960s, with Israel being a pioneer with Weizmann Institute. However, the wave of technology transfer units in organizations is marked with Stanford and MITs in the late 1960s. So we're not talking about a long period by which it is a formal practice in universities that professors sign on commercialization contracts with firms.
And what about the academia becoming this kind of global community? At the end of the day, I mean, look at you now. You are at the Hebrew University, but much of your work is done in English. That conference that you held at Van Leer a couple of weeks ago was in English. Is it really, are we seeing, just like on the cultural realm, a standardization, Americanization of academia? Does that what globalization and internationalization of academia mean?
It's partly what it means is the language we choose to speak. And here Israel indeed is an indication, the academia in Israel is an indication, kind of a barometer for global social changes. Because the first academic institution in Israel is the Technion. It opened in 1924. And the Technion chose to teach in German. It was inconceivable at that time that anything scientific could be taught in any other language but the language of the learned community of the world, and that was at that time German. Mm-hmm. So the Hebrew University that opened its doors 6 months later, April 1925, partly why it has the word Hebrew in its name is because of the language wars of that era in this land. Mm-hmm. And now we all teach in English.
Yeah, so back in 1925, did the Hebrew University deliberately choose to be at a disadvantage for the greater cause, which means the revival of Hebrew in the land of Israel? Was it really a disadvantage?
It was not a disadvantage because it saw it as part of its mission, and that is to revive an ancient language and to make it the language of knowledge in the modern era.
No, but in terms of scholarly excellence, or maybe, as you said, only recently the term competitive edge of universities, was it really not on the radar at all back in 1925?
I think the notion of excellence was taken more from within the community. We didn't need, I think professors at that time did not need to project the excellence of their institution. It was to the wider society. It was important that their peers would see the excellence of their own work. And when the Hebrew University proclaimed that relation with the Hebrew and with the Zionist idea of reviving the Hebrew language, it did so partly, and it could get away with it partly, because it was a university of the humanities. Mm-hmm. Maybe the disciplinary, most likely the disciplinary emphasis allowed it to make that proclamation. Mm-hmm. However, most of the writing of professors, even at that era, were in foreign languages,
right.
and not in Hebrew. Mm-hmm. This is the way we communicate with our peers.
Yeah. So that existed even back then. I mean, the question of, even back in the early 20th century, and surely before, academia and scholarship wasn't done in the confines of the local community. As you said, it always had this maybe international aspect to it.
Yes, but not as much as in a strategic way. And when I say strategic, I mean in a managerialized way. We bring management experts to run the university and to guide us through these complex strategies of the world, ignoring the fact that indeed our institution has been forever managed by academics, and that we understand the way to engage with our community.
Do these managers understand academia? Or do they try to impose a sort of framework that is really foreign to universities?
Well, they surely make an effort to listen to us and to work from within. But the age of consultancy had come to academia. It is partly backed by the ethos we all share in the role of expertise. And then we think, why should I invent the wheel and rethink the strategy of my own department, my own faculty, my own university, where there are companies that this is what they do?
Right.
Shouldn't we learn from what the best universities in the world are doing and bring their experts in how they have become so excellent in order to teach us? So we turn to these experts, and the pressure that comes on academia, meaning we are promoted on the basis of our academic work, and academic work we mean research and publications and tutorship of new researchers. Nobody counts for us, or counts very little for us, what we did in terms of management. So our day is very busy, and more tasks we are happy to delegate to those experts. And once we do that, we slowly lose control. And the balance right now, or the ratio right now between administrators and management experts and academic faculty in universities is changing in a direction that it has never been before.
In a sort of a meta turn of events, you are a sociologist studying these processes. It's kind of also a reflexive exercise in a way.
We have a funnier name for it. We call it navel gazing.
Yes, sure. Yeah, something that we Israelis aren't really strangers to. I want to ask you, again, at the very scientific scholarly level, what is really the added value that you find in it as a sociologist in studying?
Universities are really interesting institutions. They're obviously interesting to me because I live them every day. But they're also interesting because they are at the forefront of the public sector. And quite a few of the processes that we now see appearing in academia are most likely going to seep into the public sector in general. So in that respect, universities are really interesting. And the more universities think in terms of efficiency and competitive edge, we could also see how they relate to the corporate world. And in the corporate world that is more recently globalized, maybe should look at academia and learn at the processes and the tensions that emerge there.
Is it really a two-way street? Because recently we see many more young people, I wouldn't say exploiting academia, but using academia as some sort of way to further themselves, develop their careers. It's no longer this realm that is detached from normal life, as it were, as it was, a few decades ago, half a century ago. Is it really, what you're studying here really signifies the embedding of academia into larger society, really a process that we actually see around us?
Academia is indeed a social institution, and because it is embedded in wider society, we see through its prism changes that are societal, global, and very dramatic. So what we see right now, when you refer to it as an exploitation of academia by strategic students who just want to upgrade their careers, we could see as the current edge of a long process of the expansion of education. And the expansion of education started with mass education, with just pushing literacy around the world from the middle of the 19th century and then after World War II into the developing world. And the massification of education is reaching higher education. So here the issue is issue of access to the latest social resource that we value, and that is the value of knowledge, the social resource of knowledge. And the expansion of higher education has been most dramatic. Some researchers show that whereas in the year 1900, at the turn of the 20th century, 2% of the world's population were attending tertiary education institutions, meaning post-secondary higher education. At the turn of the 21st century, in the year 2000, 20% of the world's population. And we're not here, we're talking percent, we're not accounting for the dramatic growth in
absolute numbers.
In absolute numbers.
Yeah.
So today there are, by estimates of 18,000 institutions around the world that give or award academic degrees, academic credentials. This is a phenomenal number. Higher education is not for the elite. And when higher education is not for an elite and a huge proportion of the population comes into higher education institutions, colleges and universities, then they come for a variety of reasons. It is not only for the elite academic that are going to forever research for the sake of basic knowledge, but rather a lot of people are coming for the academic credentials that promote their skills and further their careers in a formal way.
So this is, again, a global process that we see everywhere. I want to ask you about Israel. Is Israel especially exposed to these phenomena by virtue of being a small country with a handful of academic institutions?
Yes, and because of the ideas that this is a learned society in particular, Israel is second only to Canada in the number of people per cohort, the young cohorts like yourself, that attend tertiary education institutions. So this is indeed a phenomenon. And the academic revolution in Israel that came with the law in 1994 expanded the number of academic institutions.
The law that led to the establishment of colleges as opposed to research universities.
Exactly, exactly. And today we have 66 institutions in Israel alone that are accredited. It's a lot. Talk about competition.
Yeah, completely. All right. Professor Gili Drori, the head of the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and the co-director of the International Conference, Internationalization, Globalization and the Governance of Academia that was recently held at the Van Leer Institute. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you.
And also big thanks to Alex Benish, our devoted sound engineer, and to the Van Leer Institute for their generous support. If you like this podcast, there are many more where it came from. Just go to www.tlv1.fm/podcasts and take your pick.